the final of the World Cup in soccer, France versus Italy. France led through the tournament by their talisman, Zinedine Zidane, most talented midfielder of his generation, tall, shaved head, intense eyes, the picture of joyless focus on the field. And Italy, having ground their way through an ugly tournament, only having surrendered a point to one team, the United States, in the ugliest match of the tournament, where some of the competitors left the field bloodied. They would meet in the final of the World Cup in 2006. What happened? Early in the match, Zidane scores a goal. A few minutes later, Marco Materazzi answers for Italy. Materazzi, a 6'4", 200-pound defender, that's heavy in soccer, with a shock of black hair and a goofy smile. They get to the end of regulation time, still 1-1. They go into extra time, 2 more 15-minute halves. After 110 minutes of soccer, still locked at 1-1, heading for penalty kicks, but France is pushing for the winner. Their talisman goes up for an attack. Italy gets the ball back. As he's going back to his side of the field, Marco Materazzi says something to him. And a couple of seconds later, he returns and headbutts Materazzi in the chest, gets sent off by the referee. France loses its captain on the pitch, its coach on the pitch, Zidane, goes into the penalty kicks demoralized. Italy wins the World Cup. Marco Materazzi won the World Cup for Italy by saying something to Zidane about his sister. Now, what if Materazzi did this in every game, that goofy smile? Isn't that something we'd want to measure? Isn't that an intangible benefit to having Materazzi on the field that's important to coaches and scouts and recruiters? And it's not just in that sport. Reggie Miller and John Starks in the NBA. For years, if you watched the Pacers play the Knicks, Reggie Miller was inside John Starks' head, talking to him through the whole game, throwing him off. So much so that I saw a documentary on this recently, and there they are sitting in suits in separate rooms talking about it, and Reggie Miller was still in John Starks' head. But it could happen in any workplace. So how do we measure these intangibles? It's an extremely important subject, and to figure it out, we have to talk about different types of metrics. The first type is called a mechanistic metric. At least that's what I call it. That's where we look at all the actions that somebody does, and we placed a value on all of those actions. And we do it by looking at how those actions have contributed to our end goal, in this case winning soccer matches, over time. So we look at historical data, and we collect a lot of data, and we estimate some models to help us put a value on all those actions. And then we sum up all those actions, and we look at how each player generates those actions, and we give them some sort of value. That's a mechanistic metric. And how do we collect these things? Well, we started by having people sit in front of soccer matches, watching telecasts and recording, at first by hand and then with touch screens and tablets and things like that, to try and log all this data. And they were logging 1,500 to 2,000 events per match with all sorts of qualifiers, the X and Y coordinates and the timestamps. And then we said, well, maybe we could add some optical tracking or RFID tracking to that. And so we started to get that kind of information as well. And we started to say, well, we need both of those together. We need the event data together with the tracking data, and we tried to merge those. And now we have computer vision. And you say, wow, okay, just feed the zeros and ones from that digital broadcast feed into a computer. Let it identify the players and the ball and the referee, just in the matrix, basically, which happens to be Materazzi's nickname. And identify the players and their coordinates. And now computer vision is taking another step where it can actually identify actions as well and start to give that context that we thought was only available from humans. So technology is helping us to get faster and better at these mechanistic metrics. But there's another set of metrics, and those are agnostic metrics. And that's where we say, how much better does your team do when you're on the field versus when you're not? Or to get a little more complex, when you're on the field with a specific combination of other players on your team and the other team. What's your plus minus? We don't know how you did it. That's why it's called agnostic. We have no idea how you made that contribution, but every time you're on the pitch, for some reason your team does better. You know, Michael Lewis wrote a big piece in the New York Times Magazine several years ago about Shane Battier, this basketball player who was at Duke and then he was in the NBA. He didn't score a lot of points, didn't get a lot of assists, but his team always seemed to do better when he was on the court. Same question, right? The agnostic metric gives Shane Battier a big number. The mechanistic metric doesn't give him a big number because these actions that we measure are not really very big for him. Well, how do we do the agnostic metric right, where we can make sure that we're measuring your delta, your effect on your team and the other team, even though soccer is such a complex game and they could have different combinations of players playing with you in every match? We actually go back to 1960 and a formula developed by Lloyd Shapley, an economist and mathematician who won the Nobel Prize for a cooperative bargaining solution. He wanted to see, if you got a bunch of people together to build cars, what would be the division of revenue or profit amongst those people that would keep that team together, where everybody who contributed a lot would get paid enough so they wouldn't want to leave, and the people who didn't contribute as much would still feel like they were getting their fair shake. And he came up with a formula, which is essentially a very advanced plus-minus formula. Well, we can use this age-old formula from 1960 and just the time you're on the field and who you're on the field with to get an agnostic metric, your overall contribution to winning a soccer game. Don't need any technology for that. But here's the key. If you have the mechanistic metric and you have the agnostic metric, and you denominate those two in the same currency, well, the agnostic one gives you the whole picture, your overall contribution. And the mechanistic metric gives you the part that we can measure with specific events. What's the difference between those two? It's the part of your overall contribution that isn't measured by the mechanistic events. It's the intangibles. So now we can find Materazzi's intangibles by comparing these two numbers. And this is an extremely powerful tool. We can find a talented player who's a bad fit on his team because his mechanistic metrics are great, but his intangibles are lousy, right? Or we can find someone who seems like you're not getting all their potential because they seem to have a good overall contribution, but the mechanistic metrics are disappointing. This is a tool that you can use in almost any workplace. Now that we have this thing, what are we going to do with it? Well, technology is going to help us to get the mechanistic metrics better and better so that we are chipping away at that remainder, the difference between those things, right? Because probably our agnostic metric, our overall thing, is capturing some things that we could still measure with mechanistics. So we chip away at the difference between those two. But the more we do that, the better our measure of intangibles is going to be. So technology is helping us, but there's no substitute for an age-old formula for your intangibles either. Thank you very much.